but the overwhelming majority of people who are currently ending up in intensive care in our hospitals are people who are not boosted. If you're not vaccinated, you're 8 times more likely to get into hospital altogether. So it's a great thing to do. It's very, very important. Get boosted for yourself and enjoy New Year sensibly and cautiously.
Meanwhile, some pharmacies are reporting a huge problem with shortages of lateral flow tests, saying there were requests every 5 minutes over Christmas. The Association of Independent Multiple Pharmacies is warning of patchy supplies following a change in self-isolation rules from 10 to 7 days if someone tests negative. The UK Health Security Agency say the delivery capacity for testing kits has doubled to 900,000 a day since mid-December. In Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon says she won't introduce further coronavirus restrictions because hospital cases have remained broadly stable. The First Minister says she expects a steep increase in cases over the coming weeks, but reiterated the latest restrictions and guidance, which includes closing nightclubs and 1 metre social distancing. Scots are also being urged not to travel to England for New Year's Eve, where clubs are still open.
And it's also why over Hogmanay and New Year's Day and for at least the first week of January, we are advising everyone to stay at home more than normal, to reduce contacts with people outside our own households and to limit the size of any indoor social gatherings that do take place so that they don't include people from any more than 3 households.
Meanwhile, over in France, every second 2 people are testing positive for COVID. That's according to the country's health minister. Olivier Véran also said France had reported a record daily high of 208,000 new cases. That's up from 180,000 on Tuesday, while the WHO's Director General Tedros Ghebreyesus says he's becoming increasingly concerned by the global cases.
Right now, Delta and Omicron are twin threats that are driving up cases to record numbers, which again is leading to spikes in hospitalizations and deaths. I'm highly concerned that Omicron, being more transmissible, circulating at the same time as Delta, is leading to a tsunami of cases.
Elsewhere this afternoon, more than 100 cases of harassment and stalking have been reported in Parliament since the start of last year. Figures come from the Met's Parliamentary Liaison and Investigation Team, which was set up following the murder of MP Jo Cox. It recorded 117 cases between January last year and September this year. The Met Police say they'll treat such allegations seriously and seek to bring offenders to justice. Social care system is not fit for purpose and is handing some children over to criminal gangs. That's according to a new report. The Commission on Young Lives says many teenagers are moved away from where they live and sometimes end up in areas with high levels of crime. The Department for Education says it is urgently reforming the system to address growing pressures. Insulate Britain's protests have cost the taxpayer at least £4.3 million. The group blocked motorways for 3 months, calling on the government to cut carbon emissions by insulating homes. The Metropolitan Police spent the bulk of the money, with over 6,600 officers and staff used. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps said he was appalled by the bill. You're up to date with what is happening in the world at 4 minutes past 3. We'll have more for you at 4.
Well, apologies if we're labouring the point about COVID, but it does seem to be the preeminent story today. And as we heard in the news there, Nicola Sturgeon has been updating the Edinburgh Parliament on the latest COVID situation in Scotland. In spite of the fact that hospitalisations are not rising dramatically, current restrictions on hospitality and the bigger events are expected to remain in place at least until the 17th of January. Scots have been urged to stay at home and not celebrate Hogmanay in the way they usually would. Some 16,000 new COVID cases were reported, with 80% of those the Omicron variant. Let's get more on this now with our Scotland reporter, Davy Donaldson, who's actually in Aviemore for us this afternoon. Davy, welcome again. We talked about this before she spoke, Nicola Sturgeon. Did we broadly get what you expected?
Yeah, I think so. As I said, the restrictions would remain in place, and they have, and I don't think that'll come as a huge surprise to just about everyone. So yeah, obviously the cases are slightly concerning, almost 16,000 cases. That's good. Obviously, a lot of people will be worried and concerned about that. The message regarding New Year I don't think will come as a shock either, urging Scottish people to stay in Scotland and not go over the border and go to places like Berwick-upon-Tweed or Newcastle, or perhaps further down Manchester and maybe Carlisle. So she's reiterated that message. Will people listen to the message? Well, I'm not so sure about that. I think some people will travel out with the country regardless of what the First Minister has said. But she also said there as well, that was interesting, I think, when her speech was about the delay in obviously the number of cases and the number of people needing hospital treatment. So again, that's something I think we're going to see more of, and certainly a rise in that over the next coming weeks.
Yeah, she doesn't know, David, does she? She was absolutely abundantly clear about that. And to carry people along with some fairly draconian restrictions, and I think certainly compared to England, we can agree that's what they are, relatively speaking. And she said precisely it's encouraging that at least until now the rise in cases experienced over the past few weeks has not translated into a corresponding rise in hospital admissions. On the contrary, she said, the number of people in hospital with COVID has so far remained broadly stable. For those people who say, actually, this is all about hospitalisations, that's the key metric in all this, they'll be looking at what she said there and wondering whether she ought to perhaps behave a bit more like Boris and a little like how she's behaved so far.
Yeah, a lot of people will think that, and of course a lot of people up here are looking enviously down at England and saying, why have we got restrictions in place when of course people down in England are allowed to enjoy their New Year and mix freely. A lot of people would be slightly frustrated and annoyed by that, and you can't blame them for thinking that way. But obviously there's restrictions in place in Wales and in Northern Ireland. Scotland have gone down this route. Obviously England have decided to do something else, but certainly people up here will feel a little bit aggrieved that their New Year plans have been put to one side because of restrictions. And not just that, you look at the hospitality industry, restaurants, bars, etc. This is a busy time for them. They make a lot of money out of this, and here they are having to obviously restrict things, and that's going to be extremely difficult. Obviously the Hogmanay parties across Scotland have been cancelled as well, so it's a really torrid time for the hospitality industry in the country.
David, for now, thanks very much indeed. Debbie Donaldson there, joining us from a very picturesque Avonmore, I'm sure you'll agree. Now, pharmacists have warned they are struggling to get hold of enough rapid COVID tests following changes to self-isolation rules. Demand for lateral flow tests, it increased after the time people with COVID had to spend in quarantine was cut from 10 to 7 days. The Association of Independent Multiple Pharmacies said staff and customers were concerned over the lack of supply. Meanwhile, the debate goes on as to whether the amount of time people spend in isolation should be cut even further to just 5 days. It increasingly looks like pressure on the NHS in England is to some degree being caused by as much by staff shortages as it is by the number of COVID admissions. Earlier, I spoke to a former NHS nurse and barrister, Rebecca Butler, and asked if Boris Johnson's resistance to further restrictions was the right line to take.
Not only patients that suffer, it's also, the mental health of people in the community. It's also the economy. And I think, in a way, Boris does seem to have taken a real political gamble here, but I can't believe for a minute that he's taken a gamble when the numbers and the data seem to suggest that there's going to be a major problem. And as I said, we have the epidemic in the under 40s at the moment. If it does, switch into the 60s and 70s, then he might have to bring in other non-pharmaceutical interventions to, suppress the spread. The current situation in hospital is brilliant, but if you have nurses off, you then have to shut beds. So those same cancer patients, where there is a crisis, absolutely for sure, they could suffer delays in treatment or having, their chemotherapy started or their radiotherapy started purely because staff are off sick.
That was Rebecca Butler. Now, a new report claims 16 and 17-year-olds in care, they're at risk of being drawn into crime due to a social care system that is unfit for purpose. I dare say you could have perhaps read that introduction 10, 20 years ago, couldn't you? The damning report by the Commission on Young Lives, demanding a total reform, they say, of the current system to better protect those vulnerable teenagers who make up a quarter of those children in care. Our West Midlands reporter, Balvinda Sidhu, has been speaking to the former Children's Commissioner for England and chair of this report, that's Anne Longfield.
We've got is, in all kind of essence, an epidemic of teenagers that are coming to harm. They're being exploited, they're being targeted by gangs and those that wish to involve them in violence. And because of that, and because we are protecting them at the earlier stages, more and more teenagers have been coming into care. We've seen one of the biggest increase in teenagers coming into care that we've ever had. And almost a quarter of all children in care are now 16 and 17-year-olds. These teenagers coming in, they've often been living very vulnerable lives. They've been involved in violence. They've been targeted and exploited. They need a new kind of care.
The system, some would argue, isn't really doing anything for those young children it's been built for. I mean, we've seen the recent murders of Arthur Labinjo Hughes and Star Hobson, and it seems that the same statements keep being made over and over again, that lessons need to be learned. When are those lessons going to be learnt?
Well, there is a review of children's social care going on at the moment, something that I pushed for some time. So there's an opportunity here to make improvements, and I really want teenagers to be high on that list. But there are some chronic themes going through the social care system at the moment. The lack of ability to identify early, the lack of data sharing, the lack of information, the lack of coordination with other agencies. And they're also stretched at the seams in terms of funding. The average cost of a place for a teenager at the moment is an eye-watering £4,000 a week, £200,000 plus a year. And there's many that will go up to £10,000 plus pounds a week. Now, that's a child who's fallen into crisis, have very complex needs, that has escalating needs. Think what we could do with that funding if used earlier to protect those children from harm, to stop them falling into crisis, and also many more too. One of the things that we're really keen to look at is how we can develop new foster care models that actually could be really much better served for young people. Youth workers, for instance, if we could attract youth workers, train them up to be foster carers, they understand young people, they'll be able to build that relationship. That would cost a fraction of what we're now seeing.
What is the solution then? I mean, you've already mentioned a better foster care model, but what else do you think needs to be done to protect vulnerable teenagers?
I'd like a new teenagers' social care system, if you like. I'd like it to really concentrate on understanding and recognising when teenagers were at harm early and working with those families to wrap support around those families. We need a kind of ring of protection for those kids so the exploiters can't get to them. If they do have to go into care, then I want a really different approach, local foster care that can actually work with families.
Anne Longfield, formerly Children's Commissioner, in conversation with Balvinda Sidhu. I think there'll be those of you looking at that thinking that a life in care for children is often, sadly, a route into crime for many of them. Lots of wonderful stories to the contrary, of course. Let us know if you have them. Just a couple of emails on Scotland. Tony, these governments love COVID powers, he says. It allows them to control their population even further, for the greater good. Wales and Scotland are prime examples of just that. Alex Phillips, next, reviewing a turbulent year that it has been, hasn't it? Stay with us.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello there. An exceptionally mild end to 2021. Breezy at times with some outbreaks of rain, all courtesy of an area of low pressure. Lots of isobars covering the country, which means it will continue to be windy, with a succession of weather fronts moving up from the southwest, hence the reason why the air is so mild. But that does mean, as we head through Wednesday and into Thursday, further spells of rain are likely, again moving up from the southwest. A strong wind pretty much wherever you are, and this rain could turn heavy through the early hours of the morning for northern England, the Midlands, East Anglia as well as Wales. More heavy rain to come, particularly over the Highlands of Scotland. Now, as we head into Thursday, it will be mild and it will be a windy start to the morning. Now, through the morning, you can see this rain continues its passage eastwards, so clearing Wales through the latter part of the morning into the afternoon. And we'll see some brighter skies, particularly for Antrim and Down. Northern Ireland seeing more cloud towards the southwest, and brighter skies for Aberdeenshire down towards Borders as well as Northumberland. Always more rain, though, arriving across Wales, the Midlands as well as the West Country later on in the day. And look at that breeze. It's going to be windy wherever you are, quite gusty, particularly over the hills and mountains, but it will be mild. And then through a Thursday evening into New Year's Eve, that rain continues its passage northwards. Again, it's likely to be heavy in places, particularly for Northern Ireland and Scotland through the latter part of the night, and rain returns towards the west later on and into New Year's Eve. So the first part of the New Year's Eve, as we head to the last day of 2021, will be wet and windy for some. However, through the day, the rain will wane, it will ease. Still some lingering on across northern England, but a brighter end to the year across the north as well as the south and west. And temperatures holding up. So that leads into New Year's Day. Fine for most, some sunshine, but still rather windy, and temperatures on the mild side.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by